In John 6, Jesus has been talking before the section we're about to look at about being the bread of life and about the idea that his followers were going to need to eat his flesh and blood to be good followers, which even to us sounds a little odd, but in his day and time sounded probably a little more odd because that was not an unknown concept to the people of their world. In a place with pagan gods and the Roman system and all these different cultures that were around, were kind of weird things would happen within their religious world at times. There was still human sacrifice that would go on, stuff like that. And so when Jesus said this, his audience didn't know quite what to make of it. And even nowadays, one of my favorite theological words that I don't agree with, transubstantiation. It's just fun to say, but it's basically the idea that some religious groups have of when you're taking communion, as we just did, that at some point in that process, it actually becomes, instead of a cracker, the flesh of Jesus, and instead of the juice, the blood of Jesus. Now, if you're visiting, we don't believe that, and we don't think that's what happens, but there are groups that do. This idea of eating the flesh and blood really turned a lot of people off, as it probably would today. You will not find on our sign out front where there's always a catchy phrase of some kind, we're here to eat the flesh and blood. Even though we see the biblical side of that, people wouldn't know what to make of it. And so these people, as they hear this from Jesus, they're a little put off by the idea. And then we learn it's not just the people who are skeptical of Jesus, but even the people who are actually following him aren't 100% sure what to make of this. And we think it's a couple reasons. First of all, this is the idea of eating the flesh and blood, but what that means by inference is that he is going to have to die for that to happen. And so if you were to set out to follow someone who is explaining to you he's going to die an unpleasant death, then being his follower probably doesn't sound like the best plan for your life. Because you don't know when that's going to happen and you're going to lose your leader, for one. And two, you don't know if you're a little too close to this guy, is that going to be what happens to me too? And do I want to be a part of that? And so as they're struggling with this idea, we pick up in chapter 6 and verse 60. It says that when many of his disciples heard it, they said, "This is a hard saying. Who can listen to it?" And I like this phrase, "This is a hard saying." When's the last time you did something that was really hard? Something really difficult, the kind of thing that as you went into it, you thought to yourself, I'm really not even completely sure I can do this thing. You've probably, we're just starting another semester of school, especially for our college students, as you're getting new, totally different classes. You may run into some things where you think, oh, wow, I've never done this before, and I'm not sure what to make of it. Or maybe you've come into something in life where you've thought, oh, I don't know about this. Or maybe you've tried to fix something. I still remember Home Improvement that used to be on when I was like in high school. Tim the tool man, who would run into things that he would try to fix, and he would usually make a bigger mess of it than it was when it started because he got in the middle of it and it was just a big, big thing. There are so many things that are like that in life. And then when Jesus begins to teach, there are a lot of teachings that Jesus has that are not easy. Now, to be honest with you, because I come at this at a backwards lens of seeing communion to us is a cracker and some juice, and not the most difficult thing we will do this week when we think of all the things we may do, what are the hard things that Jesus teaches? So I started going through in my mind, and I've got a bunch of them here. We could have just spent the whole time doing these, but just for some, for us to consider. What are the other sayings of Jesus that people think are difficult? So the world around us today, or maybe us as Christians, what things did he teach that we would think are hard? So think back to the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. If I were to ask you to describe what it would be to be blessed, would you mention these things? Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness or justice, the merciful, the peacemakers, those who are persecuted. I don't know when we've been talking a lot about prayer on Wednesday evenings. I don't know when we pray, if we're praying for the blessings that we have in life, that the things that come to our minds often are these things. I mentioned Hobby Lobby probably too much up here. I don't imagine you will go into Hobby Lobby and find a whole lot of, thank you for the blessing of mourning. We don't think of that. We think of a lot of things that are more like blessings. And as he continues into the sermon, think of other things he says. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Do you want to be noticed all the time? Maybe they're the extreme extroverts among us that like that kind of thing, but some of us would just kind of like to get through the day and no one really notice that we're there at all. This is probably terrible as a preacher and someone who's encountered people and all that kind of stuff. I love self-checkout at the store. And I love it for a lot of reasons. I was a grocery cashier in high school, learned how to bag groceries, and so I do it better than they do anyway. I had a lot of experience in that. But secondly, there's no awkward exchange. It's just you kind of do my most awkward exchange is looking at the screen that they put in and realizing my bald spot keeps getting bigger because the angle of it, which they need to correct. But anyhow, I like the idea of just kind of going through life unnoticed sometimes. It is so weird to me that this is my job. I don't like being in front of people. And yet here I am every week being in front of people. How many times do you do something in life and you think, I hope nobody saw that? And not even because you're trying to hide something bad. You just want to kind of get through and do your own thing. And Jesus says, you're the light of the world. The things that you say, people are going to notice, and they're going to make something of. He continues in the sermon. I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whomever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. It's a hard teaching, isn't it? The idea that it's not even the action that you take all the time, but just the anger that you have and harbor in the words that you say. He continues in the sermon in verse 37. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. And he's talking all about the idea of taking oaths. So we are supposed to live lives that are honest all the time. But this is just a little white lie, and it's not going to hurt anybody. You ever talked yourself into that? Or it's not going to cause harm. It's just going to make things easier. I'm just trying to stop the conversation that follows, whatever it is. I'm trying to protect someone, and so I will lie. And Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Verse 39, he says, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. How much do we strike back before it even gets to the first strike in the first place? Just the words have bothered us so much, or what has happened has bothered us so much, we strike out against it. Or if it actually reaches the point of a physical altercation of some kind, how many people would imagine saying, all right, other side, or as he continues in this part of it, if they ask you to go a mile, go another mile, do more than is expected. Verse 44, I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So not even just be neutral with your enemies, don't harp on your enemies, don't think too much, try to be kind of okay with your enemies. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And by the way, I'm not getting the idea here that he's saying pray that they'll stop persecuting you, although you probably could do that too. I think he's actually saying pray for their well-being. Pray that God can get through to them. Pray that there is good in their life. Chapter 6 and verse 1, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So I guess when you're razzing the guy that you talked about in class, maybe you're not practicing before men, so you can use that. But we don't want to do things so we can be seen. And the world around us assumes this is what we're about, that we're doing this because we think we're better than them. We want to make sure that they know we're better than them. And we don't think that at all. But would we still do the right things if no one was noticing that we're doing the right things? Would you still be a part of the church if there was no one holding you accountable to being part of the church? Would you, when no one notices, if we're living that life where we convinced ourselves we're not a city on the hill, would we still do the right things if we thought no one was looking? So don't practice your righteousness to be seen. Do it because it's the right thing. Verse 16 of chapter 6, when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen before others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. So when you are doing the godly thing, don't make it look like you're suffering by doing the godly thing. Don't make sure everyone realizes just how hard and difficult this is and how much it is wearing on you. And the lesson of fasting almost is just wasted on us because we do so little fasting nowadays. But whatever you would put into this blank, don't do it in such a way that it's done so everyone notices. Verse 19, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. If you have lived in the same house for decades, that's fine. I've almost come to this conclusion that everybody needs to move at least once in adult life so you can realize just how much junk you have. We moved from Arkansas to Oregon before we came here. We went from a 2,200 square foot house to an 1,100 square foot apartment, and we were forced to get rid of stuff because there was literally nowhere to put it. And as we went through stuff, I began to realize, oh, but I really like that. I don't want to get rid of that. And my wife would say, we're getting rid of that. And we would continue on. And when we got to Oregon, I began to realize, other than maybe some of the power tools, which are cool, I don't really miss all this stuff all that much. And then when we came here, and we're back to kind of a normal-sized house again, it's amazing how quick it fills up. And yet it's not like it used to be. We have begun to realize this stuff is just not what it's about. I don't know what your treasures are. We have collections, we have bank accounts, we have all those things. Do not make those the focus, but make instead the focus getting to heaven and being a part of his body. Verse 24, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And how many of us have tried to convince ourselves we can balance this? We can do this in such a way that it's okay. We can make all these things work. And he just says flat out, you cannot serve God and money. Verse 25, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? And he goes on to talk about other things to not be anxious about. You anxious about anything today? When the prayer happens in our service this morning, is your mind racing with other things? When we stop and have a time of communion, do you remember Christ for a moment in that, and immediately your mind is concerned about the bill that has to be paid or the thing that has to be done or the plans that have to be made? And there are so many of those kinds of things. It's wedding week in our family. There's a lot of details going on right now. Do not be anxious about anything. It's tough. And each of these teachings, they get harder and harder, don't they? Chapter 7 and verse 1, the world knows the first part of this. They don't pay much attention to verse 2. Judge not that you not be judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Hard not to make judgments about people, isn't it? Especially people that aren't like us. And yet here we are, always thinking of how do we want to be judged? It's a difficult teaching. Verse 12, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So there is a way you would like to be treated by other people. Do you treat them in that way? And if you really want to make this hard and get challenging, do you treat all of them that way? The most difficult people you encounter, do you treat them the way you want to be treated? The people you disagree with the most, do you treat them the way you want to be treated? Chapter 19, verse 4, skipping down a little bit. He answered, have you not, and this is Jesus speaking, by the way. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Did you ever imagine in your life this would be a hard teaching? And yet here is the world in which we live, where the idea that male and female are created is somehow controversial. And if you were to say this in the wrong crowd, this is like hate speech of some kind, and it's the words of Jesus from the idea from Genesis that God created this way. It's a hard teaching for some of the world around us. He continues and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. I already said it's wedding week in our house, in our family. Because of that, there's a lot here, isn't there? When they are married, we have to let go. And we love them dearly, and we know better than they do because we've lived more life, and we have to let them go. And then beyond that, as they marry, that is forever. I'll say all these things again on Saturday, by the way. It's forever. And the world around us struggles with both of those, don't they? People don't want to let go. People want to keep telling their kids what to do. Maybe you're guilty of that on occasion. I don't know. Maybe I'm preaching at you. And then people feel like, well, if this doesn't work out, we'll just do something different. That is not the way this was designed. It's a hard teaching. In chapter 25, verses 45 and 46, he's just finished talking about how the hungry are fed and the sick are visited and all these things that are going on. And who is this happening for? And down in verse 45, it says, he will answer them saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So judgment happens with how we are treating the least of these. It's a hard teaching. Some of the least of these can be pretty frustrating, can't they? And if you are one of the least of these, some of the, I guess the most of these, they can be pretty frustrating too. We're very different people. And yet we are to treat people well. In Luke 14, and we're almost done with these, by the way, but I think all these matter. In Luke 14, verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, Jesus is not saying, if you're going to follow me, you have to start disliking everyone you're related to. That's not the point here. The point is, everything in life that is a priority now flip-flops. And Jesus is at the top of all of those things as much as you care about all those people. Because mom and dad and brother and sister and all those, they're all important, good people that you love. And yet Jesus says, if you're not willing to put me above those, you cannot be my disciple. And that is a hard teaching because we love those people. Now, I will say, by the way, as we consider the idea of teaching and making disciples and all of those, the best answer to this is to try to help those people become disciples too, and then you don't have to worry about it. Then you're all on the same team, you're all working together. But if not, Jesus always rises above, whatever it may be. Verse 47, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be his disciples. And when Jesus says this, it is not what we have made it into today of you're going to have to carry the difficult load. Bearing your own cross is being willing to give your life for this, if it came to it. Now, the beauty for us here in America is that is a rare thing, that you have to actually give up your life physically for this. But we should be willing to put him above even ourselves, even our own life. Verse 33, so therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot become my disciples. So the treasures are in heaven, not on earth. All of the stuff we have, as important as it is, does not matter if it comes between us and Jesus. There are a lot of hard teachings, aren't there? And so when the world hears these things, there's a struggle. But honestly, for us, when we hear these things, there can be a struggle. And we can do this in a couple different ways. I think for a lot of people, we know these are all in the Bible. You may have not heard them all at once like you just did. You know they're in there, but you probably don't spend just a ton of time thinking about them. Because there's a lot of good with church. And if you're visiting today and you're thinking to yourself, why did I come here this morning? This is all really hard. There's a lot of good that comes with church family. I love that this lesson has been learned. I've heard David say a couple times over the last couple weeks as they have been just showered, and will be again today, with gifts and things for starting their new lives. How do people do this when there's not a church family? And I thought, I love that you recognize that. Everything we go through in life, and if you're visiting and not part of a church family, there is something here that when things are good or when things are difficult, brings you a support group that you cannot begin to understand. The love that will come with that, the help that will come with that. And so there is an incredible amount of good that comes with being a part of the family of God. And yet in life, in the world in which we live, it's not easy. There are a lot of hard teachings. And so we see Jesus react to this. Jesus, knowing himself, in verse 61 of John 6, that his disciples were grumbling about this. I love the boldness of Jesus here because as a minister, from time to time, I know when people grumble about things. I feel like we've been very blessed here at Southwest. I've not got a lot of grumbling from people, at least not that I'm aware of. But over the years in church life, I've heard grumbling about so many things that some of them important and most of them not, that I can't even begin to explain it to you. I've mentioned before, it's been a while, in Searcy we had attendance cards, and they were pretty good about filling them out. It's never everybody, but they're pretty good about filling them out. And I would laugh at the attendance cards every time they would come in and you would look through them. On the back of a card, almost every Sunday, would be someone saying, why is it so hot in here? Or why is it so cold in here? And the guy who ran the thermostats, by the way, there was one guy that had the key. The guy who ran the thermostat said, as long as there's one of each, we're good. Somebody's too hot, somebody's too cold, it's perfect. But I thought to myself, I have been hot and cold 1,000 times in a church building at this point in life. Never crossed my mind to write it on a card, that was a thing that you do. And you think about the things that people grumble and complain about, that it's just not what they thought it would be and not what they wanted. And Jesus hears this grumbling about the idea of him dying, about the idea of eating the flesh and blood, which we know what that's going to be. And he said to them, do you take offense at this? If there is a more modern America question than this, I'm not sure what it is. Do you take offense? Isn't everybody offended by something nowadays? Do you take offense at this? Then, what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? So if you think all of this is hard, the idea that I'm going to die, the idea of eating something that represents the flesh and blood, and all of those various teachings that we looked at from the Sermon on the Mount and other places, if you think all that is difficult to comprehend and to understand and to wrap your head around, wait until you see the resurrection and the ascension. Wait until you see the one standing before you flying into the sky, as we're going to see at the end of the Gospels. Then you're really going to have a hard time wrapping your head around this. And I think Jesus would say the same kind of thing to us today. Buckle up, because it's going to be difficult and it's going to be good, and you're going to see things that you can't fully comprehend and understand and explain, and that is what following Jesus looks like. In verse 63, he says, "It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life." The flesh is no help at all. And I think if you could sum up all of those difficult teachings that we looked at from Matthew and Luke, this is it. The flesh is no help at all. How much of our effort goes into making the flesh right, the worldly things, the physical things right? And Jesus would say to us, the flesh, it's never going to be the answer to the problems. It's never going to be the solution. It's never going to be the place you'll find fulfillment. There is something bigger, deeper than that. It's the Spirit, as he describes, or the way Paul will say it in Romans chapter 8 is this: if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, and it does if you have been baptized into him, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. The flesh is no help at all, but the Spirit gives life. And all of these difficult teachings, they are the human piece of that life that's going to lead to life that is better than we can all imagine. Verse 64, "But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who those were who did not believe, and who it was who would betray him." How many times as Jesus is giving all these different teachings, knowing Judas is there, hearing it all and realizing it's not going to sink in for him completely, and it's not going to end well for him. And he said, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." After this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So they'd had enough. They turned back. They decide all of this is too hard, it's too much, we can't do this, and we're going to turn around. And we've probably, some of us, run into something like that in life somewhere along the way. Sometimes we push through and we get it done, and other times we get partway into it and we think, this is just not what I thought it was going to be. Scott, who's not here today, who hiked the Appalachian Trail last year, 2,800 miles or whatever, I've forgotten the exact amount. I can't comprehend that, taking all those months and doing that, and how tired your feet would be, and how every day you wake up and think, all right, another 15 miles today, let's go. I had a friend who tried to do it about 25 years ago. He had built up all his vacation time from work. He was going to take 3 months off, go do the Appalachian Trail. He got a few weeks in, and one day he woke up and said, my feet are tired, I'm going home. And I thought to myself, that's a real reaction right there. He'd planned it out. It was great for a little bit, and then not exactly what he thought it would be, and he carried on with life. I think for a lot of people, they look at the idea of following Jesus and think, this is a great idea. How many people have you known along the way that have decided, they've made the decision, they've come up here, they've gone in the water, they've come out, and somewhere along the way, it's too hard. Or maybe it's just not what they thought it would be or whatever. And so a lot of the people who were there, they turned back. And they still do. Many people are going to turn back today for any number of reasons. And a lot of times they'll blame it on us. And sometimes that's accurate. I don't think we were a good reason to turn back, but I think some people do. They get bothered by a person. We had that question already. Do you take offense at this? They're offended by something. We say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. It's not what they thought it would be. Or sometimes it's the Christian life is just hard. When you're around people that aren't doing it, and that's more and more the way our world is, it's just not always easy to live this way. And so people feel like, I'm just going to go back to the way I was. And so people, they turn back. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? This is the second gutsy question of Jesus in this little section, because this is a question I don't know that I would want to ask all that often. We were in Searcy. I was a youth minister a long time ago. I don't ever ask this question, Thorin. This is a bad question to ask. We had a ninth grade teacher, a guy teaching the ninth grade. He was not a ninth grade teacher. We had a guy teaching the ninth grade, and the class was very disrespectful, talked a lot. Good kids, just had a hard time focusing during that class. They didn't connect well with the teacher. And he said one Wednesday night, if it's going to be like this, why do you even come to class? And there were probably 14 people in the class. When he came back the next Wednesday night, there were 2 people there. And when he asked why they didn't come to class, he said, you remember that thing you said last time of if you're going to be like this, why? We thought, well, why do we come to class? And so they didn't. They just didn't go to class. It's a hard question to ask. Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? The question I would almost hesitate to ask of, if Christianity is what we've described today, do you still want to do it? Do you want to go away as well? But the answer that Peter gives is the answer I hope we will all give. Verse 68, it says this, Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. To whom shall we go? If it's not this life, what is it? And I think you will find that if it's not this life, there will be moments out there in the life the world lives that are nice. And you enjoy and you have fun. There are things that are fulfilling in the world around us. And yet, ultimately, the flesh can't do it. It is the life that we live through the Spirit that is the life that we are designed to live. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, with every word that comes out of our mouths, we are teaching the world around us who a Christian really follows. And if we are really following Jesus, it looks like all of those hard things that we talked about. It is not an easy path, but it is by far the best path. And generally speaking, isn't that kind of the way it works in life anyway? Has it been the easy things that you have found the most fulfillment in, gained the most from, been formed the most by? Or has it been the difficult things? The things where you really had to work at it and overcome and get there? And I don't know about you, but for me, the easy things kind of come and go. And the ones that are hard and the ones that you really work at, those are the ones that really seem to matter. And all of these hard teachings, by the way, the other beautiful thing about that is they're all doable. Not through willpower, not through flesh, but through the work of the Spirit in us and what God does in us. Through His power, we can do all of those things. We can learn not to get angry. We can learn to turn the other cheek. We can learn to have marriages that last a lifetime. We can learn to do all of these different things and live that way because God empowers us to live that way. And this morning, if that is not the life that you are living, that is the life you were designed to live. And if every now and then you feel like it's just not going right and you're hitting your head against a brick wall, it's because you are not living life in the way you were designed to live. And God would like to help you do that. He'd like for you to confess His name, be baptized into Him, and to rise and walk in this new life. Or if you have walked away from that, maybe you've been one of these people who, as you get that question of, are you going to go away as well? You did. Know that you can come back. And I would imagine if anyone decided, yes, I'm going to go away at this point, Jesus would welcome them back with open arms if they wanted to come back. Because ultimately that is His goal, that you walk with Him. Today, if you're not walking with Him, you can do that or you can come back. If there's some way we can help you, please come while we stand and sing.